Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you today with an article from Townhall.com dated August 17th, and it says Dennis Prager asked this question about communism and it deserves an answer. So let's go find out what Dennis Prager had to say. It says Dennis Prager celebrated his birthday on August 2nd, and all of us at Townhall wish our longtime friend and contributor a very happy birthday. In his honor, we're taking a look back at some of Dennis's work over the years, and perhaps more importantly, at how remarkably relevant much of it remains today. With the rise of the Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA, says we need to take some time to fully appreciate and understand the history of communism, particularly its poverty, oppression, and mass murder. And folks, if you like the socialists, it's the same thing. Even Karl Marx himself said that socialism and communism are the same thing. This is what it leads to: poverty, oppression, and mass murder. Continuing on, says the DSA has said repeatedly that its end goal is full-blown communism in the United States of America. There's a little daylight between socialism and communism, of course, yet even the DSA tacitly admits this by pointing toward communism as its ultimate destination. Socialism is merely the stepping stone they use to get there. And Stu Smith, which great at there, the Stu Studio. I know what the reference is. Do you? Yeah, you can see these people that they go ahead and say these are just bad people. If anyone's end goal is socialism or communism, you're the bad guy. Okay. Says this rebranding of socialism and communism is working, and both ideologies have increasing favorability ratings, which is ridiculous, especially among Americans too young to remember communism's grasp on Russia and too ill-informed to understand history. And that's a problem with DSA people and far leftists, is that history is they just don't understand history at all. They don't understand human nature, and history is just not a thing to them. Says, meanwhile, the same left that embraces socialism and communism as noble socioeconomic and political goals has no problem calling their political opponents Nazis and fascists. And, well, I hate to break it to you DSA types, but you might want to go see what ideology fascism came from, and that's the ideology that the Nazis were, by the way. They were, let's just say the NAZI actually stands for something. It's an anagram, like FBI is Federal Bureau of Investigation. The NAZI stands for something. You should go look up one of the words in there specifically. Will give you a hint. Continuing on, President Trump, we've been told repeatedly, is literally Adolf Hitler reincarnated, which is just the dumbest effing thing I could possibly imagine. Republicans are the Nazis, and the ICE and agencies like ICE are the Gestapo. Because the only war, remember, I've said this in many other videos, the only war to leftists that's ever happened is World War II. Okay? Just pointing that out. Says Dennis Prager, in his 2009 column, asked a very salient question that we need to think about today. The question was, why doesn't communism have as bad of a name as the Nazism? And it should have a worse. It should be, like, that's the one that people should be like, if you call me a commie, then, like, them's fighting word sort of things, not the Nazi thing. Okay, and I'm Jewish, and I'm a proud Jew. I am a Zionist, I said that before, and I say that to say that, like, I'll even tell you that the Nazis weren't as bad as the communists. Okay? I've listened to Holocaust survivors speak. Okay? I've heard them speak. Fortunately, I don't have anyone in my family who was that, but I've been to things as part of my education growing up. Okay? And again, the Nazis were not anywhere near as bad as the communists. So it says, why doesn't communism have as bad a name as Nazism? And it's worth revisiting his insights about socialists and communists. And this is a quote from Dennis Prager here. It says, why is it that when people want to describe particularly evil individuals or regimes, they use the terms Nazi or fascist, but almost never communist? Given the amount of human suffering communists have caused, the 70 million killed in China, 20 to 30 million in the former Soviet Union, and almost 1/3 of all Cambodians, the decimation of Tibetan and Chinese culture, totalitarian enslavement of North Koreans, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Russians, a generation deprived of human rights in Cuba, and much more, why is communist so much less of a term of revulsion than Nazi? Says there are Mao restaurants in major cities in the Western world. Can one imagine Hitler restaurants? Yeah, I can. They actually exist in Gaza, and no, that's not a joke. Says Che Guevara t-shirts are ubiquitous, yet there are no Heinrich Himmler t-shirts. Says in a July speech at the College Democrats of America's 2026 summer convention, the party's unofficial spokesman Hassan Piker dressed like Mao Zedong and threatened an ideological purge of the Democrat Party. A couple of weeks later, he demanded Marxist-Leninist-style punishment for those Democrats who don't fall in line. And this is a dude that is drunk, or what's the word? The phrase, he's high on his own supply. That's it. Okay? Democrats, you got to do something about this. I'm not a fan of Democrats, but you better get your shit sorted out. Okay? So the communists did plenty of that in the 20th century. Not shit sorting out, but the ideological purges and punishment for people that didn't fall in line. It says, during Stalin's Great Terror of 1936 to 1938, hundreds of thousands more Russian Communist Party members were expelled, arrested, imprisoned, or executed. This includes 98 of the 139 members of the party's leadership who were elected to the Central Committee in 1934. That's what, 2/3 of everybody? That's nuts. It says when they were arrested, it says not when, but they were arrested and shot. From 1921 to 1936, purges, in scare quotes, expelled hundreds of thousands of members, and many of them were imprisoned or executed too. Prager then lays out the reasons why history books look with more revulsion on Nazism than communism. Nazis killed few fellow Germans. Their victims were Jews, Slavs, and members of other non-Aryan and inferior groups. Nazism based its practices and ideologies on heinous-sounding theories. Germans have spent the decades since World War II exposing the evils of Nazism, taking responsibility for them, and trying to atone for the Third Reich. Nazism lost the war, and the atrocities of the Holocaust. The systematic extermination of every Jewish man, woman, and child was unprecedented and unparalleled. And thank you, Germany, for taking responsibility for that. I mean, that that is worth saying, and they do deserve credit for that. It always reminds me, though, of that Family Guy part where Brian and Stewie go to Germany, and Brian's like, they're on a tour, they're doing a tour of Germany, and they're on a bus, and Brian goes, hey, I notice your tour guide doesn't have any information about between 1939 and 1945. The tour guide's like, nothing happened at all. Nothing happened. He's like, it's something like that. It's pretty funny. But continuing on here from that aside, that Family Guy cutaway, if you will, it says, contrast that with communism as Prager does. Communists largely murdered their own people. Mao killed about 70 million Chinese. Stalin murdered 30 million Russians. Communism, as flawed and depraved as it is, was at least based on egalitarian-sounding theories and intellectualism. Granted, that does not give cover or excuse, I'm sorry, I can't seem to read that very short word. It does not give cover or excuse to the, I'm doing it again. Okay, so there are 100 million people plus killed by communism, and it explains why he did and still does appeal, or why it still appeals to the masses. So after I butchered that sentence, we're going to keep going. It says, Prager also notes that the Russians and the Chinese have not apologized for or distanced themselves from the horrors of Lenin, Stalin, and Mao. That's correct. As a former KGB agent runs Russia today. Lenin's body still lies in state in Moscow, and Russians deny Stalin's Holocaust. Mao remains revered in China and in DSA meeting halls. In World War II, at least, communism won, and as Prager notes, the winners rewrite history. And I think part of that, too, is that there's a lot of intellectuals in colleges that are far leftist and communists, and that's part of why it's spreading and why it's looked at favorably, is because they sugarcoat it and they don't want to tell you what it really is. So people start believing that sort of stuff and thinking, oh, it's actually good. Okay, I think that's a part of it as well. Continuing on, it says, but the heart of Prager's piece and the problem facing us today is this. Many remain ignorant of communist atrocities. And going back to a Dennis Prager quote, it says, there is, simply put, widespread ignorance of communist atrocities compared to those of the Nazis. Whereas both right and left loathe Nazism and teach its evil history, the left dominates the teaching profession, as I was saying, says, and therefore almost no one teaches communist atrocities. As much as the intellectuals on the left may argue that they loathe Stalin or the North Korean regime, few on the left loathe communism. As the French put it, pas d'ennemis à la gauche, which is obviously French, like it said, that I can't read correctly, says, which in English means no enemies on the left. This is certainly true of Chinese, Vietnamese, and Cuban communism. Check your local university's courses and see how many classes are given on communist totalitarianism or mass murder compared to the number of classes about Nazism's immoral record. And that's the end quote from Dennis Prager. Says Prager sounded the alarm in 2009. Nearly 20 years later, we are watching a generation of Americans embrace the very ideology whose victims number in the tens of millions, while activists openly invoke Mao, call for Marxist-Leninist punishment, and speak of communism as an aspiration rather than the atrocity it is. And communism's greatest ally in America may not be committed communists, Twitch streamers, or the Democrat Party. It may be historical amnesia, an ideology responsible for staggering poverty, oppression, imprisonment, and death can only be rehabilitated when people no longer know what it did the last time its adherents were given power. That is why Prager's question still matters. We cannot change the horrors of the 20th century, but we can refuse to forget them. And we make certain the generations coming behind us understand exactly what communism promised, what it delivered, and why America must never give it the opportunity to do so again. So very, very good there. And Dennis Prager was 100% right. I might have to pick up whatever book or anything it is, or article, I'll find out, on this, because very well said, and I agree with him. So let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.